Hi, this is Scott Bradfield, and welcome to the bathtub. I'm going to do a couple of brief episodes during the holidays, and try to keep not forget. If I don't do it every week, I'll forget. So I wanted to catch up with a few books I've been reading over the past few months that I never got around to. One of the things we've been doing is again going back to certain writers, uh, and we're reading backwards through the novels of William Trevor, whose novels I don't really know that well. I've read his short stories for decades, but I haven't read his novels. And then probably my favorite novelist of the past 50 years, Brian Moore. And we're reading backwards through them. The gimmick is it's basically giving me an opportunity to make sure I read all of Trevor's novels, and I haven't read almost any of them up until this past few months. And we're kind of at the late mid-career for both of the writers. Now, one of the books missing here is Lies of Silence by Brian Moore. So those books came out a little about the same time as this did, and I thought they kind of work together. I wanted to say a few words about these two Brian Moore novels first. One's The Color of Blood. That's the British spelling, but you can get an American spelling if you want. And this came out about 2 years before Lies of Silence, which has a lot of similarities to it in terms of its technique and texture of the book. And we've talked about Moore's early career. He starts off writing kind of not the more literary novels. They're not thrillers, but they have a sort of pace that you can't put them down. And there's a thriller aspect to all of those early books, even when there's no gunshots and there's no bombs going off. And sort of mid to late career, Moore started to write these kind of more Graham Greenish type thrillers where you actually take place with spies and there's people running around. And this one, which comes out in The Color of Blood, is in 1987, is really the beginning of his kind of exploration of these old Hitchcockian style dramas, and then bringing a real Brian Moore sensibility to the characters, who are very strong, very human, and very affecting people. Even though this is a really, as they say, terse, not a word missing. It starts off. It's about a guy named Cardinal Bem, who's one of Brian Moore's nicest people, the best people. He's a cardinal in a Poland-like country. And Moore starts to experiment with the idea of creating a country that doesn't exist, but it's basically modeled on Poland after the Russians moved in, when there was efforts to become independent, and then the Russians came in, and there's a provisional government, and they're making deals with this foreign power. And it's that type of world, and the Catholic Church doesn't know which they should do. Should they support the people's revolutionary movements against these Russian occupiers, or should they stay out of the way and just provide faith-based services that are non-political? In the middle of it, he gets caught up in this Hitchcock plot. I don't want to say much more about it than that, except that you start it from the first page. This book, like Lies of Silence, is one person's point of view. I use this in my class all the time. I've many lectures on this book from my novel writing course, because it's almost the perfect novel to show learning writers all the basic techniques. So he stays with one point of view. You're never out of the point of view. Once it gets started, you can't put it down. It just zips along. It's a very short novel. It's very cinematic. Like all Moore's books are very cinematic. You see things happening and you're visually in the scenes. And when it ends bang, like abrupt. He does this with several books at this period, where he just comes to a conclusion. It's almost too fast. And then you think, well, that was what had to happen. It's the same true of some of the books that come before this, particularly Black Robe. So he writes this. It's almost like a primer for a type of book that Moore wants to write. And 2 years after this, he writes a novel called Lies of Silence, which is kind of the first time he starts to get published as a popular novelist. And the Lies of Silence is set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, as they say. And when it came out, it got just idiotic reviews by people saying, oh, Brian Moore doesn't understand Northern Ireland. He hasn't lived in Northern Ireland, blah, blah. But basically, the whole premise of Lies of Silence is that when you have this violent altercation and this continual violence that's occurring in this city, it's about a guy named Dylan who basically wants to run away on his wife. And all this stuff's going on. He gets involved in this this terrorist attack that goes wrong, and basically all through it, all he cares about is himself and his girlfriend, and that's really the perfect. And so you have this kind of, he's never really thinking about what he should do. At one point, he does try to do the right thing, which is not really necessarily the best thing for Dylan. And the whole idea that these are people who really want to live their own lives and just have a good life is a big part of Lies of Silence. And it is like this, like Color of Blood. You can't put it down. It's a great thriller. It still holds up today. I taught it in class a few months ago, and it's great in the bathtub. But at the same time, you feel like it's connecting to something we should need to think about in terms of our approach to politics and political urgencies. That in the middle of them, there's just this man in the middle of it who wants to have a good life, and I think that's how I always remember Lies of Silence. So those are two good late mid period Moore books, and you start to see him moving into a little bit more thriller mode, and it sort of leads to really one of his best books and one of his best-selling books, which is The Statement, which we talked about last time. Felicia's Journey is, again, mid to late career for William Trevor, and we talked about a couple of very somber late novels in the last episode, and I've not read this, but it's a good one. I'm going to go back to say I don't want to be crumbing on Trevor. I don't think his novels aren't as good as his stories, but every one of the novels I've read so far has been worth reading. And this one is about a girl who comes from Ireland, from Dublin, I think, to go find a man who she had sex with, who she's pregnant by. And she goes off to England I forget where the hell they go now, the Midlands, trying to find him. And it's really about a girl who's kind of feels isolated from her family, and she feels alone, and she's not a particularly attractive girl. It's very much like it's very much like a Brian Moore character. And she goes off to the Midlands, and she's trying to find this guy who's basically screwed her over and just took off. And in the course of it, she catches the eye of a man named Mr. Hilditch, who it's pretty clear is something wrong with him, and there's something obsessive about him. And he's a big, overweight man who lives alone at home, and he immediately starts lying to her and saying he's got a wife and all this stuff, and he wants to get her into his house, and he's remembering these other women that he's known over the years and who've somehow disappeared. And you realize that you're probably dealing with a killer, but it's not done with all the kind of super clever, it's not Silence of the Lambs bullshit. It's really about a guy who's just a sloppy killer who just obsesses. These serial killers aren't super geniuses; they're just obsessive, and they just double check everything, and they know how to do it. So I'd really strongly recommend this, and it has a kind of it kind of goes off. I don't want to say what happens in it. It has a little kind of flight about 2/3 of the way through it, which I think goes on a little long. It's not quite as tight as a novel might be. But like I said, everything that Trevor writes is worth reading. And this is it's a good way to probably get into Trevor, because it does have a kind of eerie, creepy, almost macabre feeling about it, like some of the early Trevor short stories. So this is a good one. Felicia's Journey. And there's a film, which I haven't seen. Okay, I'm going to do one more of these before Christmas. These are good Christmas books. They're good reads. You won't be able to put them down, really. And you can't do bad with any of them. Okay, take care. Bye.